A federal grand jury in Detroit today charged the 13 top leaders of the Weathermen with plotting to bomb public buildings in Chicago, Detroit, New York, and Berkeley, California. The Weathermen are the militant faction of the Students for a Democratic Society. Only one of the 13 is now in custody.
Oh, those days don't come back, do they? Good times.
There's no way to be committed to nonviolence in the middle of the most violent society that history's ever created. I'm not committed to nonviolence in any way.
Or maybe they do. That's Bernadine Dorn. That's the wife of Bill Ayers, neighbor of Barack Obama, in whose house he began his political career. She was speaking then for the Weathermen, explaining what's driving their reign of terror.
Hello. I'm going to read a declaration of a state of war. This is the first communication from the Weatherman Underground. Kids know the lines are drawn. Revolution is touching all of our lives. Within the next 14 days, we will attack a symbol or institution of American injustice.
Doesn't that sound like the disembodied voices that you're hearing now on the internet? That violent, anti-capitalist, anti-wealth, anti-American movement bears no resemblance to what we're seeing here today on Wall Street, right? Nothing at all.
Big stop, build out. We got sold out. Big stop, build out. We got sold out. Big stop, build out. We got sold out. Big stop.
Unfortunately, it is the same. Well, so far we haven't seen the same level of violence yet. It is the same mentality, the same anti-corporate, anti-capitalist, anti-American, socialist, communist attitude that is permeating these protests today. Worse yet, it's exactly the same people in charge of it. The radicals who instigated the chaos of the 1960s have grown up and wised up, and they are ready for yet another attempt at a full-scale revolution in America. This is their swan song, guys. Are we really seeing a return of the truly horrible 1960s civil unrest? Is this the beginning of it? I believe it is. In case you've forgotten or you weren't around yet, here's a brief reminder of that turbulent time. In 1965, the drunk driving arrest of a black man led to the deadly Watts riots. The name of this guy was Fry. He was pulled over near his home for driving under the influence. Well, while he was being arrested for drunk driving, his brother went home to get their mom. When she arrived, apparently sticking up for her baby, she began fighting with the police officers, ripping one of their shirts. In the struggle, Fry got a club to the head, and all three were arrested. Meanwhile, a crowd had gathered, and word, mostly out-of-control rumors, spread quickly. Residents began stoning cars. See if any of this sounds familiar. Stoning cars, beating white people who came into the area. And then it turned into the Watts riots. Take a listen to history.
6 days of rioting in a Negro section of Los Angeles left behind scenes reminiscent of war-torn cities. More than 100 square blocks were decimated by fire and looters, and few buildings were left intact. Firemen were harassed by snipers and brick-throwing hoodlums as they attempted to control the fires, many of which were left to burn themselves out. As the National Guard moved in to restore comparative calm, the losses by fire alone were put at $200 million. No attempt has yet been made to estimate the losses suffered at the hands of the looters who stole everything from liquor to playpens. Firemen were later issued flak suits of bulletproof mesh to protect them from snipers who continued to shoot from rooftops. Nearly 3,000 were arrested, and authorities had to open abandoned jails to house those netted by the police. It took the appearance of 14,000 troops to bring an end to what both Negro and white leaders called insurrection by hoodlums. Civil rights leaders were quick to deplore the unbridled lawlessness, and Martin Luther King vowed to do all in his power to prevent a recurrence in Los Angeles or anywhere.
Any of that sound familiar? In Detroit in 1967, police vice squad officers executed a raid on an after-hours drinking club in a predominantly black neighborhood. They were expecting to round up a few patrons, but instead found 82 people inside holding a party for 2 returning Vietnam veterans. As the officers tried to arrest everyone there, a crowd gathered outside the club to protest. Meanwhile, a small group of men who were angry that they had been kicked out of the party started breaking windows of a nearby clothing store. Vandalism quickly spread all across the city. Within 48 hours, the National Guard and the 82nd Airborne were called in to help police and military troops regain control of the city. After 5 days of rioting came to an end, 43 people were dead. 1,189 were injured, and over 7,000 people had been arrested. Following year, 1968, one of the darkest years in American history, the assassination of MLK and RFK. There was still an open wound for the country, having just happened just months before. With that backdrop, the Democratic National Convention opened in Chicago in August. Fired up by opposition to the Vietnam War, radical groups, including SDS, gathered outside the convention. There was also Abbie Hoffman, leader of the Youth International Party, the Yippies. The Black Panthers were also there. The Yippies planned a youth festival with the goal of bringing 100,000 young adults to Chicago. They tried to get a permit from Chicago to hold a Yippie convention in the park, but the permit was denied. The Yippies came anyway. The violence started when the police tried to force the protesters to leave the park overnight. Famous artists like Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs joined the protests. Featured speakers including SDS leaders Tom Hayden, recognize his name, and Rennie Davis, Yippie leaders Abbie Hoffman and Jerry Rubin. Outside the official convention proceedings, anti-war demonstrators clashed with 11,900 Chicago policemen, 7,500 Army troops, 7,500 Illinois National Guardsmen, and 1,000 Secret Service agents. This happened for 5 solid days. The riots resulted in the infamous Chicago 8 trial. Hoffman, Black Panther leader Bobby Seale, and others were convicted of inciting a riot after a circus-like trial. No, things in America have not progressed to this stage yet, but it's beginning. It's happening now in Wall Street and about 8 other cities: Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Tulsa. Anywhere else these protesters have popped up, they'll continue to pop up. Not all of the elements that are there are radicals, but all of the elements from the 1960s are there. Radicals, socialists, communists, and anarchists. Celebrities: Susan Sarandon, a world-renowned fatso, Michael Moore, communist agitator, Noam Chomsky, and radical activist professors, Cornel West, Francis Fox Piven, who was inspired by the Watts riots, which we just showed you. They've all shown up to spur the crowds on. This is a tinderbox. All it needs is a spark. And working behind the scenes, the old familiar communist, anarchist, terrorists from the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dohrn. They were over in the Middle East, and now they're concentrating here. They're older, more experienced, maybe a little more dangerous because of it. After all, unlike in the 1960s, this time they have friends who start campaigns and then end up in very, very high places.
GBTV. The truth lives here.